India's story is one of incredible growth, a nation of over 1 billion people striving for a better future. But this ambition runs on fuel, and lots of it. From the motorcycles weaving through city traffic to the factories churning out goods for the world, energy is the lifeblood of our economy. Every light bulb switched on, every smartphone charged, and every farm tractor tilling the soil adds to an immense and ever-growing national demand for power. This isn't just about comfort or convenience, it's about fundamental development. Without a steady, affordable supply of energy, the dreams of millions could stall, and the engine of our economic progress could sputter and slow down, threatening the very foundation of our national aspirations. The sheer scale of our dependence is staggering. We import a massive 85% of the crude oil we consume, making us one of the most vulnerable major economies to global energy market fluctuations. This reliance is not a choice but a geological reality. Our domestic reserves are simply not enough to meet our needs. This deep-seated dependency places energy security at the very top of our national security agenda. A disruption in supply doesn't just mean longer queues at petrol pumps. It means a potential crisis that could ripple through every sector of our society, from agriculture to manufacturing, affecting jobs, inflation, and the daily lives of every Indian citizen. It's a vulnerability that our policymakers grapple with every single day. This reliance on foreign oil creates a constant economic pressure. When global oil prices surge, the impact is felt immediately in our import bill, straining our foreign exchange reserves and widening our trade deficit. The government then faces a difficult choice: either pass the higher costs onto consumers, risking inflation and public unrest, or absorb the cost through subsidies, which puts immense pressure on the national budget. This is the tightrope we walk. Every decision about energy is also a decision about the economic well-being of the nation and the political stability that depends on it. The quest for affordable energy is, therefore, a constant, high-stakes battle for economic survival and growth. Ultimately, for India, energy is synonymous with sovereignty. Being so heavily dependent on other nations for our most critical resource means our foreign policy is often shaped by our energy needs. We must maintain good relationships with a wide range of oil-producing countries, often navigating complex and conflicting geopolitical landscapes. It means that our ability to make independent decisions on the world stage can be constrained by the urgent need to keep the fuel flowing. Therefore, securing our energy future is not just an economic imperative. It is a strategic necessity for maintaining our autonomy and securing our place as a leading global power in the 21st century. The global energy market is a fragile ecosystem, easily disrupted by geopolitical tremors. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it sent shockwaves across the world, and the energy markets were at the epicenter of the resulting earthquake. The conflict and the subsequent sanctions imposed on Russia by the United States and its European allies created unprecedented volatility. Oil and natural gas prices soared to record highs as nations scrambled to secure supplies from non-Russian sources. For a country like India, which imports the vast majority of its oil, this global chaos was not a distant news story. It was an immediate and severe economic threat that landed squarely on our doorstep. The sanctions were designed to cripple Russia's war machine by cutting off its energy revenues, but they also had the effect of weaponizing energy on a global scale. The world's third-largest oil producer was suddenly a pariah in Western markets. This created a massive supply crunch as European nations, heavily reliant on Russian gas and oil, desperately sought alternatives. The competition for available barrels of oil from the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas intensified dramatically. For India, this meant that our traditional suppliers were now catering to a larger, more desperate pool of buyers, driving prices up for everyone and making our already expensive energy import bill even more burdensome. This new reality forced a dramatic recalculation in New Delhi. The government was faced with the daunting task of shielding its population of 1.4 billion people from the full force of this global price shock. Allowing fuel prices to skyrocket in line with international markets would have triggered runaway inflation, hurting the poorest the most. and potentially leading to widespread social and political instability. The memory of how rising onion prices can topple governments is etched into the psyche of every Indian politician. The Ukraine war, therefore, presented not just an economic challenge but a profound test of political management and strategic foresight, demanding swift and unconventional solutions. The turmoil also exposed the vulnerabilities of being a price taker, not a price setter in the global market. Our long-term contracts and relationships with Middle Eastern producers provided some stability, but they could not insulate us completely from the panic gripping the world. Global events thousands of miles away were directly dictating the price of petrol in Mumbai and the cost of cooking gas in a small village in Uttar Pradesh. This starkly reminded us that in our interconnected world, a conflict in Eastern Europe could directly threaten the economic security and developmental progress of our nation. It made the search for a more diversified and resilient energy strategy more urgent than ever before. Faced with the crisis of soaring oil prices, India made a decision rooted in pure economic pragmatism. While the West was busy imposing sanctions and shunning Russian energy, a unique opportunity emerged. To keep its economy afloat and fund its war effort, Russia needed to find new buyers for the oil that Europe would no longer take. It began offering its flagship Urals crude at a significant discount to international benchmark prices. For the Indian government, which was desperately trying to manage its massive import bill, this was an offer too good to refuse. It was a chance to procure a vital resource at a lower cost, thereby easing the immense pressure on the national economy. This strategic pivot was swift and dramatic. Before the conflict, Russian oil constituted a negligible fraction of India's total oil imports, less than 2%. Within months, Russia became one of our top suppliers, at times even surpassing traditional partners like Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Indian refineries, both state-owned and private, ramped up their purchases, retrofitting their facilities where necessary to process the different grade of Russian crude. This was a business decision, plain and simple. It was about insulating the Indian consumer from the volatility of the global market and ensuring that our economic recovery after the pandemic was not derailed by an energy price crisis. The economic benefits were immediate and tangible. By purchasing discounted Russian oil, India saved billions of dollars in foreign exchange. This saving was crucial. It helped the government keep fuel prices at the pump from spiraling completely out of control, even as global rates remained high. These savings also provided fiscal room to maintain essential public spending and subsidies without blowing a hole in the budget. From the perspective of India's finance ministry, every cheap barrel of Russian oil was a direct contribution to stabilizing the nation's macroeconomic fundamentals during a period of intense global uncertainty. The Aam Admi, the common person, was the ultimate beneficiary of this policy. Of course, this decision was not made in a vacuum. It was a calculated move based on India's long-standing foreign policy principle of strategic autonomy. The idea that we will make decisions based on our own national interest, rather than aligning with any single power bloc. New Delhi argued forcefully that as a developing country with huge energy needs, it could not be expected to shoulder the economic burden of sanctions that it did not impose. The priority was the well-being of its own people. This turn towards Russia was therefore not an ideological alignment, but a clear-eyed and unsentimental choice driven by the hard realities of economics and energy security. India's decision to dramatically increase its intake of Russian oil was met with considerable unease and scrutiny from its Western partners, particularly the United States. While Washington and its allies understood India's economic compulsions to some extent, they were also concerned that these purchases were blunting the impact of their sanctions and indirectly funding Russia's war in Ukraine. This led to a period of delicate and sometimes tense diplomatic engagement. US officials publicly and privately urged India to limit its reliance on Moscow, reminding New Delhi of the shared democratic values that underpin the India-US strategic partnership. It was a classic diplomatic dilemma, pitting our immediate economic needs against our long-term strategic alignments. The situation became even more complicated with the rhetoric of former US President Donald Trump. Known for his transactional approach to foreign policy, Trump has repeatedly threatened to impose steep tariffs on Indian goods if he returns to office. He views trade as a zero-sum game and has often pointed to India's trade surplus with the US as unfair. The increased oil trade with Russia gives him another potential justification for such punitive measures. The threat of a 60% tariff, as he has suggested, hangs like a sword of Damocles over Indian exporters. This creates significant uncertainty for Indian industries, from textiles to pharmaceuticals, that rely heavily on the American market. This dual pressure from sanctions-related scrutiny and tariff threats forces India to perform a precarious balancing act. On one hand, we need the affordable Russian energy to power our economy. On the other hand, the United States is our largest trading partner and a critical strategic ally in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in countering the rise of China. Alienating Washington is not a viable option. Therefore, Indian diplomats have been working overtime, explaining our position in world capitals and emphasizing that our energy purchases are a matter of national necessity, not a geopolitical statement against the West. We are trying to walk a tightrope, securing our interests without irrevocably damaging key relationships. The challenge highlights the inherent conflict between India's economic realities and its geopolitical aspirations. We want to be a leading power, a Vishwaguru, but our energy vulnerability often forces us into defensive, transactional postures. The threats from a potential Trump presidency serve as a stark reminder that our trade relationships can be just as volatile as energy markets. This forces India to constantly reassess its dependencies, not just on oil from one region, but also on export markets in another. The goal is to build a resilient economy that can withstand shocks from all directions, whether they come from a war in Europe or a political shift in Washington. In a country where a significant portion of the population lives on a tight budget, the price of fuel is not just an economic indicator, it is a matter of daily survival. Recognizing this, the Indian government has long used a system of energy subsidies as a crucial policy tool to shield its citizens from the full impact of volatile global prices. When the energy crisis erupted in 2022, this subsidy mechanism went into overdrive. The government stepped in to absorb a large part of the cost increase for everything from petrol and diesel to, most importantly, LPG cooking gas cylinders, which are a lifeline for millions of households. This was a deliberate choice to prioritize social stability over fiscal purity. In the fiscal year 2023, these efforts resulted in India's energy subsidies reaching a 9-year high, totaling an astounding $39.3 billion. This massive expenditure was a direct response to the global crisis, a necessary measure to prevent spiraling energy costs from triggering widespread economic distress. Without this safety net, inflation would have soared even higher. The cost of transportation for food and essential goods would have skyrocketed, and the financial burden on ordinary families would have become unbearable. The subsidies acted as a shock absorber, cushioning the economy and ensuring that the burden was shared by the state rather than being placed entirely on the shoulders of the public. However, this extensive subsidy regime comes with its own set of significant challenges. Funneling such a large amount of money into keeping fossil fuel prices artificially low places a tremendous strain on government finances. This is money that could otherwise be spent on building roads, schools, and hospitals. It creates a difficult trade-off between providing immediate relief and investing in long-term development. Furthermore, these subsidies, particularly for diesel, can encourage inefficient consumption and disproportionately benefit those who are better off, rather than being tightly targeted to the most vulnerable sections of society, creating distortions in the market. This reliance on subsidies is deeply intertwined with India's surging energy demand. As our economy expands and our population grows, the need for energy continues to climb relentlessly. In 2024, our demand for natural gas grew by 10%, a rate faster than even China's. This ever-increasing appetite means that the potential cost of subsidies will only grow larger over time, making it an unsustainable long-term solution. The government is therefore caught in a difficult bind. It must manage public anger over high prices in the short term while also finding a way to rationalize subsidies and encourage energy efficiency to secure the nation's fiscal health in the long term. India has made bold and ambitious commitments on the global stage to combat climate change. Our goals are clear: to generate 50% of our electricity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030 and to achieve a net zero economy by the year 2070. These are not just targets, they represent a vision for a sustainable and green future for India. We see massive potential in solar power with our sunny climate and are making strides in wind energy as well. The push for electric vehicles and green hydrogen is also part of this grand plan. On paper, our commitment to the clean energy transition is unwavering and forms a key pillar of our national policy. However, the path from ambition to reality is fraught with immense challenges. The sheer scale and speed of our economic growth mean that our total energy demand is rising so fast that even rapid growth in renewables cannot keep up. To avoid power shortages and keep the wheels of industry turning, we are forced to pursue an all-of-the-above energy strategy. This means that even as we build new solar parks, we are also expanding our coal mining operations and building new coal-fired power plants. This is the central paradox. We are investing in our green future while simultaneously deepening our reliance on the very fossil fuels we need to phase out. The transition is further hampered by financial and policy hurdles. While the government has provided support for renewables, recent decisions, such as cutting subsidies for electric two-wheelers, have sent mixed signals to the market and could slow down adoption rates. The vast amount of investment required to upgrade our national grid to handle intermittent renewable energy sources is another major obstacle. Sectors like offshore wind, which hold great promise, still lack the necessary funding and policy framework to take off at scale. The gap between our clean energy goals and the on-the-ground implementation remains significant, reflecting the difficult choices we face. Ultimately, the slow pace of our green transition is a story of competing priorities. The immediate and urgent need for affordable and reliable energy for our billion-plus population often outweighs the long-term goal of sustainability. When faced with a choice between a potential blackout today and meeting a climate target in 2070, the political and economic compulsion is to keep the lights on by any means necessary. This means that fossil fuels, especially coal and imported oil, will continue to play a dominant role in our energy mix for the foreseeable future, making our climate goals incredibly challenging to achieve within the stated timelines. To understand the stakes of India's energy dilemma, we need only look at the cautionary tale of other nations that have faced the catastrophic consequences of energy insecurity. The recent crisis in Cuba serves as a stark and chilling warning. In late 2024, the island nation was plunged into darkness, with widespread, persistent blackouts that brought its economy to a virtual standstill. The collapse of its electrical grid, heavily dependent on imported fuel and crumbling infrastructure, showcased the extreme vulnerability that comes with over-reliance on foreign energy sources, especially when combined with the pressure of international sanctions. This is the nightmare scenario that India is working tirelessly to avoid. The Cuban government was forced to take drastic and desperate measures to cope with the collapse. It mandated that businesses must generate half of their own power from renewable sources within just 3 years, a monumental task for an economy already on its knees. The crisis led to social unrest, economic paralysis, and immense human suffering. It demonstrated how quickly a lack of energy can unravel the fabric of a society. For India, a country with a population more than 100 times that of Cuba, the scale of such a crisis would be unimaginable. It would not just be an inconvenience, it would be a national catastrophe of historic proportions. This example from across the world brings India's challenges into sharp focus. Our 85% dependence on imported oil places us in a similarly precarious position, though on a much larger scale. While our economy is far more diversified and resilient than Cuba's, a severe global supply shock or a coordinated effort to block our access to energy markets could have devastating consequences. It underlines why our government has been so assertive in securing discounted Russian oil, despite the diplomatic fallout. The primary responsibility of any government is to prevent a catastrophic failure of its essential systems. And for India, the energy system is arguably the most critical of all. The fear of such a shortage shapes nearly every aspect of our energy policy. It explains the dual strategy of investing in renewables while also maximizing our domestic coal production. It is the driving force behind our quest for diversification, our search for new oil and gas suppliers, and our investments in strategic petroleum reserves. The Cuban experience is a reminder that energy independence is not a lofty, abstract goal. It is a fundamental pillar of national security and survival. Avoiding that fate is the silent, ever-present objective behind the complex and often criticized decisions India makes on the global energy stage. India's position in the 21st century is defined by a complex and continuous balancing act. We are a nation caught between our developmental needs and our geopolitical ambitions, between our historical relationships and our future partnerships. This is nowhere more evident than in our energy policy. Our decision to purchase Russian oil is a prime example of this intricate dance. It is an act driven by our non-negotiable national interest in securing affordable energy for our people and our economy. We have consistently argued that our primary duty is to our citizens, and we cannot sacrifice their well-being at the altar of geopolitical alignments dictated by others. This stance requires us to skillfully juggle our relationships with competing global powers. On one side, we have Russia, a long-standing defense partner that has become a crucial, cost-effective energy supplier. Maintaining this relationship is vital for both our military preparedness and our economic stability. On the other side, we have the United States and the West, our largest trade partners, key sources of technology and investment, and essential allies in the strategic challenge posed by China in the Indo-Pacific. Angering Washington or Brussels is a risk we cannot afford to take lightly, as it could jeopardize our economic growth and our broader security architecture. This balancing act is the essence of what our policymakers call strategic autonomy. It is the ability to engage with all sides without being locked into a rigid alliance that constrains our choices. It means being a member of the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia, while also being an active participant in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with Russia and China. It is a foreign policy that is fluid, pragmatic, and fiercely independent, designed to maximize India's advantage in a multipolar world. Our energy choices are a direct reflection of this philosophy. We will buy oil from wherever we can get the best deal, be it from the Middle East, the United States, or Russia. However, this path is fraught with peril. It requires immense diplomatic skill to navigate the sensitivities of all partners and to avoid being caught in the crossfire of their rivalries. A misstep could lead to isolation or punitive actions, such as the trade tariffs threatened by figures like Donald Trump. Every decision must be carefully weighed, balancing the immediate economic gain against the potential long-term strategic cost. It is a high-stakes game where the goal is not to pick a side, but to ensure that India's side, our national interest, always comes out on top. This is the great challenge and the great burden of being a rising power in a turbulent world. Looking to the future, India stands at a critical juncture, facing what can only be described as a classic trilemma. We must simultaneously navigate the competing demands of economic growth, energy security, and environmental sustainability. Each of these goals is vital for our national well-being, yet pursuing one often seems to come at the expense of the others. The road ahead requires not just a balancing act, but a masterful integration of these three imperatives into a single, coherent national strategy. This is the defining challenge for Indian policymakers for generations to come, a complex puzzle with no easy answers. First and foremost is the relentless demand for economic growth. We must create millions of jobs for our young population and lift millions more out of poverty. This requires a rapidly expanding industrial and manufacturing base, which in turn demands massive amounts of cheap and reliable energy. This pushes us towards the most accessible and affordable sources, which, for now, remain fossil fuels like coal and oil. The political and social pressure to deliver development and prosperity is immense, often making it the most powerful driver of our energy decisions, sometimes overshadowing longer-term sustainability concerns in the process of nation-building. Second is the non-negotiable need for energy security. As we have seen, our heavy dependence on imports makes us vulnerable to global shocks, price volatility, and geopolitical blackmail. This forces us to diversify our suppliers, build strategic reserves, and make pragmatic choices like buying discounted Russian oil. It also pushes us to maximize our domestic resources, which primarily means coal. This security imperative is about national sovereignty. It is about ensuring that no foreign power can turn off the tap and hold our nation's future hostage. This defensive posture is fundamental to our ability to operate as an independent power on the world stage. Finally, there is the growing and urgent imperative of sustainability. As a nation highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, from rising sea levels to extreme weather events, transitioning to clean energy is not a choice but a necessity for our own survival. This requires a monumental shift away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. However, this transition is expensive, technologically challenging, and requires a complete re-engineering of our energy system. The challenge is to fund this green shift and accelerate its pace without compromising the first two goals of growth and security. The road ahead for India is a tightrope walk over this trilemma, a journey that will test our resilience, our innovation, and our strategic wisdom.